When you build an empire, you don't just win championships and collect trophies. You create legacies. You create stories that live forever. Joe Gibbs is one of those rare individuals who has done that in two different worlds. He won Super Bowls in the NFL, he built a racing dynasty in NASCAR, but when Kyle Busch died on May 21st, 2026, at just 41 years old, something broke inside Joe Gibbs that trophies could never fix. In 2008, Kyle Busch joined Joe Gibbs Racing. The young driver had just left Hendrick Motorsports after 3 years, hungry for a new opportunity. Joe Gibbs saw something in Kyle that others couldn't see past the attitude and the arrogance. He saw raw talent. He saw a competitor who hated losing more than anybody else in the sport. And Joe Gibbs, a man who had won championships everywhere he went, understood that hunger. What followed was one of the greatest driver-owner partnerships in NASCAR history. For 15 years, from 2008 to 2022, Kyle Busch drove the number 18 car for Joe Gibbs Racing. In that time, he won 56 races. He won 2 NASCAR Cup Series championships in 2015 and 2019. He became the winningest driver in Joe Gibbs Racing history. He became part of the team's identity. He became family. But it wasn't just about the wins. Kyle raced alongside other legends like Denny Hamlin. Together they helped build the modern legacy of Joe Gibbs Racing. Every trophy they won together made the organization stronger. Every championship they claimed proved that Joe Gibbs had the ability to develop and nurture the greatest talent in the sport. When Kyle finally left to join Richard Childress Racing in 2023, it was supposed to be an ending. It was supposed to be a chapter closing, but Joe Gibbs understood that some relationships transcend just time at a team. Some bonds run deeper than contracts and trophies. Kyle once said something that revealed the depth of his relationship with Joe. He called it family. For 15 years, Joe had his back in the stupidest of moments that Kyle Busch was. That's not something you say about a boss, that's something you say about family. Joe Gibbs is a man of deep faith. He lost his son JD in 2019 to a degenerative neurological disease. He lost his other son Coy in 2022, just hours after Coy's own son won the NASCAR Xfinity Championship. Joe Gibbs knows what it means to lose people you love. He knows what it means to grieve. So when Kyle died suddenly, the pain wasn't just about losing a legendary driver, it was about losing someone Joe had watched grow from a young hothead into a man. Joe had seen Kyle become a father. He had seen Kyle racing against his own son Brexton, creating memories together. He had seen Kyle grow up under the bright lights of NASCAR, and Joe had been there for all of it. When Joe heard that Kyle was gone, he wasn't thinking about the 56 wins or the 2 championships. He was thinking about a man who had been part of his life for 15 years. He was thinking about family. After Kyle's death, Joe appeared on Prime Video before the Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte Motor Speedway. He was emotional. He was struggling to find words to capture what Kyle Busch meant. And then he used an analogy that perfectly summed up who Kyle was. Kyle was like a NASCAR locomotive, Joe said. Get on board, he's going to take you to some great places. Don't get in front of him, he may go over the top of you. That's Kyle Busch in a nutshell. You could either be part of his journey to greatness, or you could get out of his way. There was no middle ground with Kyle, there was no settling. He was going to win, and he was going to do it his way.
I honestly feel like if some of you heard that interview with Adam, his crew chief for our period of time there at Joe Gibbs Racing, Adam Stevens, I think he had the best description of Kyle. And he said it was like a freight train. This thing is going, and you can get on, there's going to be a big parts on the ride, and if you get in the way, you're going to get run over, okay? And so I thought that was a great description of him. You know, and a bunch of us got on board. I know we did at our race team, and you know, it was full bore. He's going. And there's be some good things in there, and then every now and then, he's going to run over a few things and cross a line.
There's something particularly painful about Kyle's death that Joe had to confront. The last chapter between them wasn't perfect. Kyle left Joe Gibbs Racing in 2022 in a difficult situation. A sponsor situation that couldn't be resolved. A contract dispute. A split that left Kyle feeling hurt and betrayed. Kyle had been honest about it. Something that is so disappointing to me and so hurtful about this whole situation with JGR is that they were like family, Kyle had said. For 15 years, Joe had his back. And then it just flipped and was gone. Kyle was hurt, and Joe had to live with that. But here's what's important. Even in that pain, Kyle and Joe didn't let their relationship become bitter. They didn't let the business end the human connection. Both of them understood that sometimes things don't work out. Sometimes the music stops. But that doesn't erase what you built together. When Joe came to the media center after Kyle's death, he spent 30 minutes talking about him. 15 minutes were just his opening remarks about Kyle, about his family, about remembering what really matters. And he said something that captured the essence of what they had. "I'll have Kyle Busch stories forever." That's what remained after the wins and the championships faded. The stories, the memories, the time they spent together. But perhaps the most profound thing Joe said came near the end of his reflection. When you think about Kyle's life, how do you capture somebody's life, particularly a guy that's bigger than life? Joe asked. And then he went deeper. Joe was grieving. He was talking about Kyle, but he was also talking about his own faith, his own understanding of what really matters. Joe Gibbs knows what the biggest losses look like. He knows what it means to lose children. He knows that racing, no matter how important it seems, is temporary, but faith is eternal. Joe was expressing something profound in that moment. Kyle was one of the greatest drivers in NASCAR history, but more importantly, Kyle was a husband. He was a father. He was a son. And Joe was saying that he believed Kyle's greatest achievement wasn't measured in wins and championships. It was measured in his relationships, in his soul, in his eternal destiny. That's what Joe wanted people to remember. Not the statistics, not the records, but the man, the father who raced his son, the husband who called his wife his forever Valentine, the son of Bill Busch, who carried his family's legacy forward. Joe Gibbs Racing released an official statement after Kyle's death. "Our hearts are broken for Samantha, Brexton, Lennox, and the entire Busch family. Kyle was a fierce competitor, an incredible teammate, and, far more importantly, a devoted husband, father, and son." Notice what they put first. Not the wins, not the championships, but the family. That's what stuck with Joe Gibbs when he thought about Kyle. Kyle's impact on the organization and on the sport of NASCAR will never be forgotten. That statement is true, but Joe knows that Kyle's impact goes much deeper than NASCAR. Kyle impacted the lives of everyone who knew him. He impacted his wife, Samantha. He impacted his children, Brexton and Lennox. He impacted Joe Gibbs, who will carry the memories of Kyle for the rest of his life. He impacted the fans who watched him race, who cheered him on, who felt connected to him because he was real and passionate and didn't apologize for who he was. Joe spent decades building a racing empire. He won championships in the NFL and NASCAR. He became one of the greatest team owners in sports history. But near the end of his life, when one of his greatest drivers died unexpectedly, what Joe wanted to talk about wasn't the wins. It was the stories. It was the memories. It was the human connection. So what do you think about Joe Gibbs's perspective on Kyle Busch? Were you touched by what he said about family and legacy? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this is a conversation about what really matters. And if you want to hear more tributes from people who knew Kyle Busch, from coaches and drivers and family members who are processing this loss, subscribe to this channel.